So, have you ever stopped to think about what guarantees the doctor you're about to see is, well, actually qualified? There's this whole process for it. It's called medical credentialing. It's supposed to be this invisible foundation of trust in our healthcare system. But here's the thing, that foundation, it's starting to crack. And we're going to look at how a system that's meant to protect us often ends up doing a whole lot more harm than good. I mean, listen to this. It's from a recent analysis, and it sums it up perfectly. This quote right here really captures the intense frustration that so many amazing, highly qualified doctors are feeling. It kind of sets the stage for what we're talking about today, a system with really good intentions that just goes terribly, terribly wrong. All right, so before we get into the nitty-gritty of what credentialing is supposed to be, let's first talk about the real-world pain this process causes. Because, and this is super important, this is not just about paperwork. We're talking about huge, massive consequences for both doctors and for patients. So, in a perfect world, right? You'd think that verifying a doctor's entire career, we're talking their education, all their training, their licenses, the whole shebang, it should take about 90 to 120 days. 3 to 4 months. That seems pretty reasonable, doesn't it? Well, the reality is often a lot closer to this. We see applications stretching out for 6 months, sometimes even longer. And you've got to imagine what that feels like. It leaves these incredible, highly skilled doctors completely stuck in professional limbo. They can't see patients. They can't earn a living. All while the hospital or clinic that hired them is just waiting. So what is going on here? What's gumming up the works and causing these massive delays? The craziest part is it's almost never about whether the doctor is actually good at their job. Nope. Instead, it's this endless series of super frustrating bureaucratic hurdles that honestly feel like a game of gotcha. And these are the exact kinds of gotcha moments we're talking about. I mean, get this. A residency end date is listed as June 30th on one form, but July 1st on another. Boom, denial. Or a doctor gets scrutinized for a gap in their employment history because they took 6 months off to care for a sick parent. These are tiny, completely explainable things that can bring an entire application to a screeching halt, triggering an automatic denial from a system that just seems to lack any and all common sense. Okay, so let's just pivot for a second here. Hearing all these problems, you might be asking yourself, why do we even have this system in the first place? Well, because at its heart, the idea is really, really important. Credentialing is supposed to be the absolute foundation of patient safety. To put it simply, it's the ultimate background check. It's the system that's supposed to make sure the person in that white coat is exactly who they say they are. It's how hospitals and insurance companies do their due diligence and confirm that a doctor is actually qualified to join their team and, treat patients. So the whole process is basically built on 3 core pillars. First, there's what's called primary source verification. That means they don't just take the doctor's word for it. They go straight to the source, contacting the medical school, the licensing boards, you name it, to verify everything directly. Second, they do a deep dive into national databases to look for any red flags, like malpractice claims or disciplinary actions. And finally, they gather professional peer reviews, getting feedback from colleagues and supervisors who've actually seen the doctor in action. Okay, this next part is super important because it clears up a huge point of confusion. Credentialing and contracting are not the same thing. Think of it like this. Credentialing is what proves you're qualified to even get into the club. Contracting? That's the separate process where you negotiate your salary and benefits, basically how you'll get paid. And you absolutely cannot have one without the other. A signed contract is totally useless until your credentialing is officially approved. So, if the intention behind all this is so good, why is the actual process so incredibly painful? Well, it's because the system itself is failing. It's cracking under the pressure of some very modern problems that it just wasn't built to handle. And we can pretty much boil these failures down to 4 key things. First, you've got this massive wave of healthcare consolidation, hospitals merging left and right. Then there's the outdated, clunky technology they're all using. Add to that a crazy quilt of complex state-by-state licensing rules. And finally, there's this underlying culture, this guilty until proven innocent mentality. Let's just take consolidation, for example. Picture this. A small practice could get a new doctor credentialed in, say, in 90 days. Easy. But then, that practice gets bought by some massive health system. Suddenly, that same doctor often has to start the entire process all over again, from scratch. And now they're looking at a timeline of 180 days or more, all because this new giant company is struggling to merge totally different systems and policies. And then there's the technology. Oh my gosh. It often feels like it's stuck in the 1990s. So many hospitals are using these clunky, outdated software systems that literally can't talk to each other. What does that mean for the doctor? It means they have to sit there and manually enter the same information. We're talking details from their entire career, over and over and over again into different, incompatible systems. And of course, that just multiplies the chances for one of those tiny, application-killing errors to pop up. This patchwork of state-based licensing rules just adds another huge layer of complexity, and it's a real killer for telehealth. See, medical licenses are issued state by state. So a doctor licensed in California can't legally hop on a video call to treat one of their own patients who just happens to be traveling in Arizona, not without getting a whole separate Arizona license. In today's world, that's just a massive roadblock to providing modern, continuous care. And I really want to stress this point. This isn't just some administrative headache. It's not just annoying paperwork. These bureaucratic failures create a massive ripple effect, and the cost is deeply, deeply human, both for the doctors and, crucially, for the patients who are left waiting. I mean, look at the two sides of this coin. On the one hand, you've got doctors who've maybe moved their entire family across the country for a new job, only to be forced to go months without a single paycheck. The financial strain, the emotional stress, it's immense. And then, on the other side, you've got the patients. Their surgeries get delayed, they have to wait longer and longer for an appointment. And in some rural areas, a credentialing delay doesn't just mean a longer wait, it can mean the community loses access to its only specialist. Okay, so after all that, the big question is, how do we fix this thing? Well, the good news is, people are finally starting to recognize just how broken this system is. And there are some really smart, concrete ideas for reform on the table. So what does the path forward look like? Well, it involves a few key ideas. Imagine a universal credentialing system. Basically, you get verified once, and that's accepted everywhere. That would be a game changer. Then there are things called interstate compacts, which are already making it way easier for doctors to practice telehealth across state lines. Some hospitals are trying out conditional privileges, which means a doctor can start working under supervision while the final paperwork gets sorted. And of course, the big one, better technology. Using things like AI to automate the process and finally get rid of all those tiny human errors that cause these epic delays. And all of this kind of leaves us with one final big question. This whole system, medical credentialing, is supposed to build trust in our healthcare system. But what happens when the process itself is what breaks that trust? What happens when it becomes so inefficient, so hostile, that it burns out good doctors and actually prevents patients from getting the care they need? Look, the challenge isn't to just throw the whole system away. The real challenge is to rebuild it from the ground up into something that actually protects patients without punishing the very doctors who are trying to care for them.